Welcome back to our Getting to Work series. We're walking through the use of these tools. All the tools we've been showing in our Setup Shop series. Now we're going to be getting to work with these. I'm going to be taking a look at chisels. And I think that a lot of people would think, well, what can you talk about with chisel usage? It's just a pretty basic tool. But I think the thing that people are missing with that is the more simple the tool is, the more skill is demanded. Right? There's not a lot that is going to be guiding this tool. There's a flat, there's a bevel, but basically it's all going to be in the user's hand. You have to have the skill to manipulate the tool to get it to do what you want. So there's a lot of skill that can be exercised in the use of a chisel. A knife even more so, because there's even less to hold on to. Because what I'll show you here is a few different ways that chisels are commonly used in furniture making and all other sorts of bench-based woodworking. That if you have these few basic skills, you'll see that it's actually relatively, I'll say, simple but not easy, right? So that the number of operations that you're going to be doing, the kinds of ways you're using this, they're relatively few. There aren't too many ways, but using them and applying them at the right time in the right way is going to be the path to success. So it's not easy, but it's simple, if that makes sense. So what I want to do is I want to show you the two different primary ways that chisels are used. They're used for chopping and they're used for paring. And chopping, here, I'll spin around here. I'll show you on this board. I just have a piece of alder here, I think it is. And you can use this with hand pressure. You know, you can take a little curl like this way and you can push the chisel with just hand pressure for subtle things. But it's really hard to, let's say I wanted to chop a little mortise right here, right? It would be quite hard to use my hands and try to dig that out, because you can just imagine if I started trying to do that, it's just gonna, it's a little bit, I can't really stay quite on there, right? So if a more controlled way, especially if you're trying to put a lot of pressure behind it, when you're holding a tool, a chisel like this, and you're trying to put pressure and you got this, push it, and that slips, you don't have a lot of control. Not only is that kind of dangerous for you, but it's dangerous for your work too. You can ruin the work if you're not very controlled. So one way that you can approach it is by chopping. And the reason this is so controlled is there's more force, but it's very localized, very, very controlled. So once I'm done hitting, it's not going anywhere, right? I'm not leaning into it. It's going to let loose. So I can just tap like this. This isn't typically where I chop a mortise, but you get the idea of the use of a chisel. So I can do that. So you can see it's actually a lot of force. I'm able to dig really deeply, really quick, but there's no risk of my chisel going sideways or slipping out because it's done. It's very focused application of energy. So that's one way you can do it. Also, when you're chopping, you can use this to pry a little bit too. This isn't primarily like a prying tool. It's for chopping, but it is the width of the hole, and so you can dig the stuff out of the hole. So chopping is one really primary way that you're going to be tackling woodworking projects. Chopping. You can chop waste out, and you can come from both sides. Now you'll see that I have, I can chop with the bevel down, and I can also chop with the bevel up. And they both work. I mean, I only have one point, right? I have a bevel and a flat, and they control a certain way. So if I'm establishing, if I have the bottom of what I want to establish, if I'm establishing it with the bottom of the flat of my chisel, it's going to ride that, and it's like this. Here, I'll use the bigger one so you can see. If I set this on here on this edge and I tilt up a little bit, I'm using the bottom to establish that, and so you can see how the curl is consistent. It's relatively easy to make a consistent depth of cut. This way, is a little bit trickier because I can go up and down and like, see. So if I angle it a little bit, I'm completely dependent on kind of riding like this. So this this flat is like the bottom of a plane sole. You're able to ride that, and if you just subtly lift, all of a sudden you have so much more control. And that's the whole design of a chisel, is that you have an established reference point that you can set the tool on to have more control with how much you're lifting. When you're up like this, if I were to try to, like plane the board with this chisel, it's really tricky to try to keep a consistent angle, because every time the wood, it catches a little bit and then it slows down, and then I have to put a little bit more resistance. But as I do that, I'm pushing and every angle is changing. And so that's of course why you have a plane. But you can see the illustration here. If the chisel's up, it's so much harder to control. Even if it's on an edge, you're kind of rocking around, but you can ride the bottom and get a really consistent curl. So those are the two primary ways. It's bevel up and bevel down. And the bevel up is when you're riding the bottom of the chisel. So like even right now, okay, so I just chopped this and I got this stuff sticking out of the hole. You can see I can slide this chisel around and the edge is engaging right there. It's not engaging, it's at the plane of the top of the board, the surface there. But watch, see that? So now it's catching right there. So if I trimmed a little bit off there, I can use this to skim off the protruding material so that I know it's level. And you can now see it's level. So that's of course the benefit of having the flat bottom, which is also, by the way, the reason you don't want to put a secondary bevel on the underside of your chisel iron. If you have like a plain iron and you're gonna, you can put a secondary bevel on the back side, on the non-bevel side, and that's fine because it is actually bevel down, right? It's in the plane fixed. So if you have a secondary bevel back here or on top of here, it doesn't change much at all. But if you're trying to ride that and then the underside of that edge is actually a little bit relieved, you're going to have to start lifting to catch that, to engage it, and you're now starting to work into it's like a double bevel. You're basically taking a knife and trying to skim across the surface. So it's a lot trickier. So the chopping and the paring are the two primary ways that you're going to use this tool. But also, what I want to do is show you over here. I have for this video a little mocked up peg that's driven into a hole, because if you're draw boring a mortise and tenon joint and you cut this flush, there are different approaches you're going to use, different grips and holds that you're going to use to pare that flush. So you want to be coming, when you're paring a pin like this, you want to be coming from the outside in all the way around. If I just did this and pushed right across, I'm going to break out the backside of this pin. So I can use this, I can kind of lean and just skim off the high parts of it if I want, and just get it a little bit lower. But if that's too much material. If I just put it flush, and I can't push it, right? It's just too much. And it's actually going to try to force it down, and I'm just going to be fighting it, because if I catch underneath, the material on top of the bevel is going to try to force it down. It's just too much meat. I just can't do that. So you can do bevel down. So if you look at the way I want to use the bevel down, because I want to actually cut up. I want to be trimming off the high edges to kind of make a domed top to this, so I have less material to pare flush. So I want to be able to take it up, but I also don't want to just do this, right? Because I have no idea where I'm at, right? That's not a very controlled way to cut. So I want to have as much contact as possible. I have my palm resting as much as possible down the board. I have all my fingers across the top, bevel down, and so the other thing with having your hand down on the board is, you can see I caught it. I can actually catch the chisel from going too far. If I was doing this, I was fully gripped, I have nothing stopping me. My muscles are going to try to catch it as it goes way past. So that's not a very accurate way or precise way to work. So I can come from this way. You can see I can begin to work around and pare all the way around here. And I will do this awkward thing around the corner because so I don't block the camera. That's very hard to do. There, well, that's possible. But okay, so now that I'm getting closer and closer, so now there's enough meat that I can skim across the top, and there are a few different motions I like to use. You can see I had my finger here, and I'm pinching it like this, and this way it's pinned right in this position. So now I can kind of rock it, and I can push it forward. But when I push it forward, it's very, very controlled. Again, if I was just doing this, I can't really control that at all. So whenever I'm paring or I'm using a chisel, there's always a lot of contact on the board, on the stock. So I'm just using I have as much contact as possible. I'm rocking in here. I'm using as much grip as I can, so I can just use very controlled, localized application of pressure and sneak my way right across. So at this point, I had the bevel up because I'm trying to pair flush. So I'm using the stock. I'm using the stock's flat reference edge to give me the plane that I want to come down to. And so I'm just coming around all sides. And there's this little bit back here, and so I'm going to do that. Yeah. So you can see this as I come across this last little skim cut, and that is very nearly flush. So you saw even in this really simple little operation of paring a pin down, I have the flat there, but the key is that every time, whether I have the bevel down or the bevel up, my hands are all over this thing. I never want to be using a chisel like this or like this or like this. And even if I'm gonna take a chamfer edge, right? I have, you see how much control? This whole thing is covered with my hands, and I have my pinky back down in the side, and I'm pushing. And this isn't because I'm necessarily scared the chisel is going to go flying, because I could, it's hard, I could do this. I'm not in danger, but man, that is tricky. But this way I can actually, and I have my hand resting against the stock here. Everything is wrapped in and nice and close, and I can take consistent shavings that way. So the more the more points of contact you have on the work, the better the result's going to be. You can control that so much more. And so if you were to take a blunt edge, we've talked about this and the difference between cross-cutting and ripping with a saw, the difference the way the teeth are oriented. A rip is going with the grain and it's sort of a blunt force. You can do that, but a cross-cut, the teeth are actually skewed. And so when you're coming across, you have this really subtle, gentle cut when you're skewing. And so if you were to come across this grain here, now I just took a chunk out, I would not take this and blunt force that, because all the fibers are coming this way and I would just be hitting them and bludgeoning them. But if I come at an angle, so it's skewed, I'm not cutting down right now, I'm actually cutting this way. So I've skewed it, and see how my hand's here? I can come across. And so as I cut, I'm actually angling down because of the way the end grain is here. But I can come across, and because I'm skewed, I'm not just blunt force. If you have a really sharp chisel, you can get away with some of that bad technique, but it's much cleaner to cut on the skew. So that's the basic overall of using chisels. They're really pretty basic tools, but I think the key to success with these things is having as much contact, points of contact on the work, and as much contact on the tool as possible, as much control. You don't want anything forceful happening. So whether it's your hand locking it in and a little bit of pivoting, pushing this way, or you're using a mallet to give it very direct, localized pressure, those are the two keys to using a chisel successfully. So I think that it's easy to underestimate the complexity of such a simple tool, because people think, well, it's so simple. I mean, what do you got to do? You just use it. You just use the tool. And they think maybe the more complex the tool is, the more time you got to put into learning. But I think once you start practicing these techniques and you start learning that, you'll see that the benefits of this design, that it has the flat bottom and that you're able to do a lot of different things. But you have to use the right technique for the right moment. If you try to do the wrong thing, if you try to take a chamfer with this, you're going to quickly realize, why you want to have the flat down. So I highly encourage you to get acquainted with your chisels. You want to be practicing these techniques so you feel comfortable. You can quick put a chamfer on something with a chisel. You don't have to go find a special chamfer plane or something like that. You can just put a little corner on it, make something nice. Also, when you have the pins, you're not dependent on having a specific saw, a flush cut saw that can get all the way down and then, I don't know, sanding it flush or something. You can just take a quick chisel and clean it right off and it looks good. That's the kind of skill that you want to have. So we'll continue in this series. We'll continue looking at tools and using them, but the real key that we want to drive home with all of these is that you want to focus and use good techniques, because the simpler the tool is, the more skills involved. So if you like this, feel free to leave a comment below, ask questions. There's so many people out here, sharing ideas and sharing approaches that they take. But I think the key is having as much grip on the tool as possible. So if you're interested in this kind of thing every day, we have the M&T Daily Dispatch, where we post stuff like this every single day. And you can subscribe up here, click over there, and join us.